My mom's the HOA president, dude. This cabin's ours now. The kid standing on my porch couldn't have been more than 17. Designer hoodie vape tucked behind his ear, mirrored shades reflecting the lake. He spoke with the kind of confidence only someone who'd never been told no in his life could muster. I just stood there, coffee in hand, watching him strut around my dock like he was inspecting property he owned. The lake behind him was calm, the birds still singing, and yet I could already feel the tension building like thunder. My name's Brian Nelson, and what this kid didn't know is that I wasn't just some random homeowner. I'm the chief of police in this county. I came here for peace and quiet, but peace has a funny way of disappearing when an HOA thinks it owns the world. I smiled slowly. Kid, you just claimed territory from the wrong man. Before this gets messy, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe because you're about to see what happens when the law meets the HOA. By the time the kid swaggered back down my driveway, I already knew what I was dealing with. His kind of arrogance didn't grow on its own. It was cultivated, fertilized, and proudly displayed by someone far more dangerous, his mother. Her name was Grace Moore, and around Crystal Pines she was treated like royalty. Pink blazer, pearl earrings, SUV so white it could blind you under the noon Sunday. Grace didn't just run the HOA, she was the HOA. When I first moved out here 6 months ago, neighbors warned me about her. Watch out for Mrs. Moore, they said. She means well. Until she doesn't. I laughed it off. I thought I'd seen every kind of power trip in my 20 years as chief of police. But I'd never met anyone who weaponized picket fences and bylaws quite like Grace Moore. The first sign came 2 weeks after I bought the cabin. A letter from the HOA, fancy letterhead, gold logo, unnecessary bold fonts. Notice of property noncompliance. Your cabin's exterior paint color, cedar brown, is not within the HOA's approved palette. Please repaint to one of the following tones: lake sand, pebble mist, or tranquil taupe. I called the HOA office thinking it was a mistake. The woman who answered hesitated before whispering aisle. Tell Mrs. Moore you called, and that was that. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Mr. Nelson came the voice, sweet, crisp, commanding. This is Grace Moore, president of the Crystal Pines Homeowners Association. I see you've received our letter. I did, I replied calmly. And I also see my property lies outside HOA jurisdiction. Bought it that way on purpose. There was a pause, then a short, polite laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I think you'll find that the HOA lines were updated last year. We've recently integrated the lakeside properties for community improvement. That was the first time I heard her say community improvement. Every tyrant hides behind that phrase. I'll be sure to look into that, I said and hung up. Over the next few months, I watched Grace's empire in action. She fined retirees for hanging wind chimes. She threatened a single mother because her front yard gnome clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. She banned outdoor grills, then hosted a HOA barbecue fundraiser on her own lawn. And somehow, everyone complied. Why? Because Grace Moore ran everything: the committees, the newsletter, the beautification fund. She even controlled who got elected onto the HOA board. The woman could charm you at a meeting and bankrupt you with a vote the next day. So when her son Ethan declared that my cabin was the HOA's property, I knew it wasn't just teenage stupidity. It was learned behavior. 3 days after that confrontation, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Community Event Access Request. Approved by HOA. The body of the email read like an official document complete with HOA seal and signatures. Per Section 8B of the Crystal Pines Community Charter, the HOA will utilize the lakeside cabin for a youth graduation celebration. We appreciate your cooperation in fostering a sense of unity and belonging among residents. The email was signed, Grace E. Moore, HOA President. At the bottom, there was a cheerful note: please ensure the property is unlocked by Friday, 5:00 p.m. I leaned back in my chair, reading it twice. Unlocked. Like it already belonged to them. That evening, I drove into town to visit the county records office. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I just asked the clerk, a young guy with a buzz cut for the Crystal Pines zoning map. After flipping through old files, he looked up and frowned. Your cabin's not part of that HOA, sir. The border ends at Ridge Creek Road. Exactly what I thought, I said. Then why are they sending you HOA stuff? He asked. Because I said some people think authority grows like mold quietly and everywhere. The next morning, my phone rang again. Mr. Nelson Grace's voice came syrupy, sweet, but brittle underneath. I'm just calling to confirm that you've received the event notice. I have, I said evenly. And I'm calling to confirm that I won't be unlocking my property for anyone. There was silence, then a chuckle. Oh, I see. You must not understand how these things work. The HOA has communal rights under revised zoning ordinances. This cabin technically falls under shared use. That's funny, I replied, because according to county records, your authority ends half a mile east of my dock. Her tone sharpened. You may want to rethink your tone, Mr. Nelson. We can issue fines, revoke access. Ma'am, I interrupted gently, you can't revoke something that was never yours. The silence that followed was glorious. But I knew that kind of ego doesn't back down easily. So instead of arguing, I decided to observe. I installed new cameras, small, discreet, motion-triggered. I made copies of my property deed and laminated them. And I started quietly digging into the HOA's financial statements. You'd be surprised how many people treat HOA budgets like private checking accounts. It didn't take long before I found something strange. A line item labeled Community Youth Engagement Initiative, $12,000. When I asked around, no one in the community had ever heard of such a program. $12,000. Gone. No receipts. 2 days later, I saw Grace's white Escalade pull into my driveway. She stepped out all pearls and perfume, carrying a clipboard like it was a scepter. Ethan followed behind, grinning like a prince about to inherit a kingdom. Mr. Nelson, Grace began, I wanted to come by personally to ensure we're on the same page. The graduation celebration will proceed as planned. I took a sip of coffee. On my property. On community property, she corrected. And the HOA has already allocated funds for cleanup and supervision. I smiled. Allocated from which account? The same one you used for your youth engagement initiative. Her smile faltered. Excuse me, oh nothing, I said, shrugging. Just curious where the community money goes these days. For the first time, Grace looked genuinely uncomfortable. She adjusted her necklace, muttered something about improving morale, then snapped her clipboard shut. Friday at 6, she said curtly, turning to leave. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Trust me, I replied. You're the one making it harder. When she drove off, I stood there watching the dust settle. The sun glinted off the lake like it was winking at me. If she wanted a party, she'd get one, but it wouldn't end how she expected. I picked up my phone and called an old friend from the sheriff's office. Rodriguez, I said I might need a few off-duty patrol units at Crystal Pines this weekend. Possible unauthorized gathering, underage drinking, trespassing, the usual. He chuckled. You're finally poking the HOA bear, huh? Not yet, I said. I'm just setting the table. That night I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and sat out on the dock, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. If Grace Moore wanted to test how far her authority reached, I was happy to show her inch by inch, document by document, warrant by warrant. Because I wasn't just another homeowner trying to mind his business. I was the law she thought she could bend. And come Friday night, the HOA was about to learn what happens when the queen of paper rules walks straight into the court of cold, hard justice. By Wednesday, the stillness of Crystal Pines felt like the quiet before a storm. The lake shimmered with that deceptive calm only nature and bureaucracy can share. I'd learned long ago both can destroy you slowly if you ignore the warning signs. That morning, my motion-triggered cameras pinged my phone. There he was, Ethan Moore, marching straight onto my property with 2 of his friends. They weren't sneaking, they were filming. One of them spun around with a drone capturing the dock, the trees, the reflection of my cabin on the water. Ethan pointed at the porch and laughed, shouting something the mic didn't catch. Then he lifted my old fishing hat, the one that had belonged to my father, and put it on backward for a selfie. The caption he later posted read number My Lake Life, number Ho Party Prep number Thanks Mom. My jaw clenched, but my pulse stayed steady. Anger was easy, proof was power. So instead of storming out there, I poured another cup of coffee and watched him through the live feed quietly, noting every trespass, every second, every angle. By noon, they'd already crossed another line. I received a delivery notification. Your order of 3 folding beer pong tables has been delivered. Delivered to my address. When I drove into town later that day, I saw the delivery truck parked near the HOA office. The driver told me a Mrs. Moore had called confirming the drop-off location. I smiled politely, thanked him, and jotted his name down for later. That evening, I called my attorney Jim Wallace a no-nonsense guy who handled more HOA drama than divorce cases. He listened quietly as I described the situation. Classic overreach, he said finally. They assume if no one pushes back, the HOA's word becomes law. I'm not pushing yet, I replied. I'm documenting, he chuckled. You're still the same patient son of a gun you were back when we busted that land fraud case. Patience builds leverage, I said. Just don't wait too long, he warned. These people love to rewrite rules while you're still reading them. He wasn't wrong. The next day, I received a revised HOA newsletter printed in full color and stuffed into every mailbox in the community. It read, Upcoming community event youth graduation celebration at Lakeside Cabin courtesy of HOA partnership with local residents. We're thrilled to announce that the HOA has secured access to the Lakeside Cabin for the benefit of our youth. Special thanks to our supportive homeowners who make events like this possible. Below that was a small photo of my cabin, my deck, my chairs, my boat. I took a deep breath and counted to 10, then 20. Then I started laughing. This wasn't arrogance anymore, it was delusion. Friday approached like a ticking clock. I checked every camera angle, replaced SD cards, printed timestamps. Then I started looking deeper into Grace Moore's digital fingerprints. HOA bylaws are public records, so I compared the version on file with the one she'd sent me earlier that week. The difference: one subtle line added under Section 5, the association may temporarily use any community-adjacent property for approved activities benefiting residents. Community-adjacent, a term that meant absolutely nothing in zoning law. She'd literally written herself permission to invade. Thursday evening, the first trucks arrived. Teenagers unloading speakers, lights, and beer coolers. They looked around like it was a movie set. When one of them saw the private property sign nailed to my gate, he laughed and said, "Oh, Mrs. Moore said, ignore that." I stepped out onto my porch and gave a polite wave. "Evening, boys," I called. "You're early for tomorrow's arrest." They froze, exchanging confused glances, then hurried back to their truck. I watched them leave, then turned the lock on my gate and set up an extra camera facing the driveway. The bait was laid. That night, my phone buzzed again, another security alert. Grace herself striding up my walkway in heels, clipboard in hand. She didn't knock this time. She tried the door handle, locked. She looked straight into the camera and muttered, "He'll regret this." Then she left. I replayed the clip 3 times. The lawman in me smiled. Trespass, intent, threat, 3 charges, 1 clip. Friday morning came bright and heavy with humidity. I cleaned the porch, checked the locks again, and waited. At exactly 5:47 p.m., the sound of engines broke the peace. Car after car rolled in BMWs, Jeeps, one stretch SUV blasting pop music. Teenagers poured out with beer cases and party lights, led by none other than Ethan Moore, now wearing my father's hat like a crown. "Mom said it's fine," he shouted, to no one in particular. I watched from inside, calm as a man setting a trap. They clipped my chain lock, pushed open the gate, and rolled their coolers across my lawn. Someone set up a portable speaker near the dock, music blasting over the water. A few kids jumped straight into the lake, splashing and yelling. It would have been a normal teenage party if it wasn't on my land. Grace Moore arrived an hour later. Her Escalade pulled up like a presidential motorcade, headlights sweeping over the crowd. She stepped out in her trademark pink blazer and high heels, holding a champagne flute. "Welcome, everyone," she shouted, voice echoing across the lake. "The HOA is proud to sponsor this event for our amazing youth." Applause. Cheers. A few parents I didn't recognize smiled nervously, pretending to belong. She spotted me standing on the porch and gave a condescending little wave. "Mr. Nelson, thank you for letting us use your beautiful property." I raised my phone and said evenly, "Don't worry, I'm recording every word of that." Her smile twitched. "Oh, lighten up. It's for the kids, then maybe host it on your lawn," I said. She took a sip of champagne. "We're all part of the same community." "Not legally," I replied. That one hit her. The mask slipped for just a second. The night spiraled from there. By 9 p.m., the dock was shaking with music. Teens drank openly tossed cans into the water, and someone set off a small box of fireworks. My cameras caught it all, every open container, every illegal ignition, every trespass. I stayed on my porch, silent and patient. When one drunk teenager puked near my grill, I made a note of the time, 9:42 p.m. Then I heard shouting. Ethan standing on top of a cooler, yelling for attention. "This is our lake now." "HOA rules, baby," his friends cheered. Grace laughed. And that's when my phone buzzed. "Sheriff's units in position," came Rodriguez's voice. "You want the lights yet?" "Not yet," I said. "Give them 15 more minutes. Let the queen crown herself." 15 minutes later, Grace marched up to my porch again, clearly tipsy. "Mr. Nelson," she slurred, "I really must insist you stop filming. This is community property tonight." "You sure about that?" I asked. "Because I just confirmed with the county assessor. This address is 100% mine." She blinked, confused, then hissed, "Don't make me call the police." I smiled. "Ma'am, that's the best idea you've had all night." I stepped back into the cabin, pulled on my navy blue jacket, clipped my badge to the front, and opened the door again. The crowd froze. Grace's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the porch. Ethan's jaw dropped. I adjusted my collar, my voice carrying over the music. Everyone here is trespassing on private property. Anyone under 21 with alcohol, step aside. The rest of you prepare to be ID'd. Dad, what Ethan stammered. I'm not your dad, son, I said calmly. I'm the chief of police. The air went dead quiet except for the sound of the lake lapping against the dock. Then from somewhere in the dark came the wail of sirens. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the night like the 4th of July. And as the first patrol cars rolled in, Grace whispered the last words I'd ever hear from her as HOA president. Oh, dear God. The sound of sirens always had a way of changing the air. That rising wail-sharp electric can cut through laughter faster than any weapon. As the first cruiser turned down the gravel road toward my cabin, the kids froze, mid-dance, mid-drink, mid-denial. Their faces, once lit by LED party lights, turned ghostly blue in the flashing strobes. Grace Moore's smile vanished. She turned toward the lake, blinking against the light as if she could will the cars away. Turn those off, she barked. This is a private event. I stepped forward, my badge glinting under the cruiser beam. No, ma'am, I said evenly. This is an illegal event on private property. Ethan looked around, the first flicker of fear in his eyes. Mom, what's happening? Grace didn't answer. She just muttered. He couldn't, but I could. And I had. The first 2 deputies out of the cars were Rodriguez and Carter, both off-duty officers who knew exactly why they were here. They fanned out with quiet professionalism, flashlights cutting across the yard, illuminating beer cans, broken bottles, and a deflated, inflatable swan half buried in the mud. Rodriguez nodded toward me. Chief. Deputy, I replied. Ethan stumbled forward, face pale. Wait, you're a cop, chief of police, I corrected. And you're about to have a very educational night, he stammered, but Mom said, I know I interrupted. Your mom says a lot of things. Grace finally found her voice. She marched toward me, heels clicking on the wood deck. Brian Nelson, this is an abuse of power. These are children. You're traumatizing them. I tilted my head. You mean the same children drinking stolen alcohol and destroying my property? This is a misunderstanding, she insisted. The HOA authorized. I cut her off. You are the HOA, Grace. You authorized yourself to break into my cabin, vandalize it, and throw a party funded by community money. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. Her face reddened under the lights. I'll sue you, I smiled. You're welcome to after booking. She laughed, but it came out brittle. You can't arrest me on my own property. This isn't your property, I said softly. And you're not immune from the law. Deputy Carter approached with a clipboard. Chief, you'll want to see this. He handed me an invoice pulled from the catering truck parked by the gate. Invoice Sunshine Catering Co. Event Graduation Celebration. Authorized by Grace Moore, HOA President. Amount $3,218.64. Paid via HOA account. Grace's expression cracked like glass. That's just a community expense. Sure, I said, flipping the page. Listed under Community Engagement Program, right. The same fund you've been moving money from for months. Her hand trembled. You can't prove I raised my phone. Smile. The screen played back the earlier footage of her trying my doorknob, muttering, he'll regret this. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan tried to bolt. Rodriguez caught him halfway down the path, steady but firm. Easy there, kid, he said. We're not cuffing you yet. But I didn't do anything wrong, Ethan shouted. Mom said it was allowed. Rodriguez sighed, shaking his head. Son, that's not how the law works. I walked over, calm but unyielding. Ethan Moore, you're being detained for trespassing, property damage, and possession of alcohol as a minor. He blinked at me, eyes wide with disbelief. You can't arrest me. My mom's in charge here. Behind him, Grace shouted, don't you dare touch my son. I turned to her, voice steady as granite. He needs to learn what accountability looks like, and so do you. The deputies began reading rights, gathering names, lining up kids who looked one bad decision away from tears. The flashing lights painted the water red and blue, a mirror of chaos reflected back by the calm lake surface. A few parents arrived, drawn by panicked phone calls. One woman clutched her purse like a shield, whispering, I thought it was an HOA event. It was, I said, until the law showed up. By the time backup units arrived, the music was silent. The crowd divided neatly into groups, the crying, the texting, and the pretending not to care. Grace paced near the dock, muttering under her breath, rage simmering beneath every movement. When I approached, she spun around. You set me up, she hissed. You wanted this to happen. I nodded once. I wanted proof. And you provided plenty. You're a disgrace, she snapped. Using your badge to settle personal vendettas, I smiled faintly. Funny. I thought you'd be grateful someone finally enforcing the law around here. Her jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," I said. "A woman about to lose her title." Deputy Carter returned. "Chief environmental team's on their way. We found open fuel containers near the dock. Some kids were lighting fireworks right beside them." I turned to Grace. "You realize if that caught, half the shoreline would have gone up in flames. Congratulations, you almost made the evening news for a lake fire." She swallowed hard. "You can't pin that on me." "Grace," I said, lowering my voice, "you funded it, organized it, approved it, and stood in the middle of it. It's already pinned." The officers began escorting the kids to waiting cars. Most were being released to their parents, but Ethan wasn't so lucky. He'd crossed too many lines, breaking the lock, entering the cabin, even pocketing my father's fishing hat. When Rodriguez retrieved it from him, he looked embarrassed, small for the first time that night. I took the hat and brushed off the dirt. "This belonged to my dad," I said quietly. "He wore it the day he taught me how to respect what isn't yours. Maybe someday you'll get that lesson too." Ethan didn't answer. He just nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. Grace tried one last desperate move. "I'll call the mayor," she shrieked. "He's on my HOA board." "Already did," I said. "He's on his way with a warrant." She blinked, lost. "A warrant," I gestured toward the incoming unmarked sedan rolling up behind the cruisers. Out stepped County Investigator Linda Hayes, a woman with a reputation sharper than barbed wire. "Evening, Chief," she said, nodding. "Got your message? We've been tracing the HOA funds since your tip last week." Grace went pale. Tip Hayes smiled thinly. "You didn't think no one would notice the missing 12 grand, did you?" Within seconds, Hayes' team started pulling boxes from Grace's SUV, receipts, folders, a laptop bag. "This is harassment," Grace screamed, her voice cracking. "No, ma'am," Hayes replied calmly. "This is a search warrant." I watched it all unfold, the panic, the unraveling, the hollow arrogance collapsing into fear. Grace Moore, queen of the HOA, was suddenly just another suspect under flashing lights. As they read her rights, she turned toward me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "You think you've won. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked past her toward the silent lake, now bathed in red and blue. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I said. "And for once, so do you." By midnight, the yard was empty. The cruisers left slow trails of dust down the road. My dock creaked softly in the dark. I stood there alone, the smell of spilled beer and burnt fireworks